Hi, I'm Miss Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids, episode 31, Behukottai. And it's going to cover the rest of Leviticus, Leviticus 26:3 to 7:35. And this week we're going to talk about order and chaos. We're going to cover the famous blessings and curses chapter of the Bible. Well, one of the famous blessings and curses. The other one is in Deuteronomy 28. So we have, what are blessings and curses? Well, when you read my book, the Ten Commandments and the Covenants of Promise, you're going to find out about blessings and curses as far as ancient Near Eastern covenants go, suzerain and vassal covenants. But there's another aspect to look at it. You know, with the Bible, there are always different aspects because that was how they were looked at in covenants. But we also have the ancient Near Eastern way of looking at order and chaos. And that is another way to look at blessings and curses. That's what we're going to do today, and this is going to be really interesting. So, in the ancient world, order is tantamount to blessings. And I'm going to explain that. I want you to imagine living in a world without any technology. Imagine living in a hot place without refrigerators. Imagine living in a hot place without an air conditioner. Oh my gosh. Our air conditioner broke down on the Sabbath. And we were like freaking out. It's like, what do you do? We're so weenie these days. We can't put up with a little hot weather, can we? And it was really humid yesterday, so I was being a big baby. Anyway, but no refrigeration is huge. If you think about not being able to store food for long periods of time without it spoiling, that is big. Now, think about not having banks. Think about not having grocery stores. Think about not having cars. Think about not having any of the things that we take for granted in this society. You see, we've really made a society where we need these things. Even people who try to get away from it all, they rely on technology that we've created nowadays. They just try and figure out different ways to run it. So we've become a society that's very, very dependent on technology. But when people didn't have that, when they couldn't store foods for long times, when it was hard to get from one place to another, when there was no electricity, period. What does that mean? Well, when there's no sprinklers for your farmers' fields, what does that mean? It means total dependence on God for everything. We really can't understand what it's like trying to just survive from year to year and having everything depend on this year's harvest. And the rains falling at exactly the same time. So, let's look at this one by one. In Leviticus 26, when it's talking about blessings, it's talking about mainly three things. And the first is agriculture, especially rain. If the rain falls at the wrong time of year, you lose your crop. If your rain doesn't fall at the right time of the year, you don't give a crop to lose. If it's too hot, or if it's too wet, if it's too cold, if it's too dry, then you're in trouble. If you don't have the right temperatures at the right time of year, you're in big trouble. And if you don't have food this year, it means your livestock doesn't have any food. And it means you don't have any food because you don't have 10 years of food stored up. You don't have a freezer full of meat from last year. And actually, they didn't eat much meat because meat was too valuable. Animals were too valuable to use for meat. They were used for other things. So, what's the second thing? Peace. That's one of the things it talks about in Leviticus 26. Your enemies will run from you. 5 of you will put 100 to flight. People won't be invading your land. That's huge in those days. And then there's increase. If the Israelites were obeying God, they would multiply and have increase. Now that's not just two ways of saying you'll have a lot of kids, because having a lot of kids isn't a blessing if you can't feed them. So on one hand, you've got multiplying. That means families would be blessed with a lot of children. But the increase means that their production, that their wealth, that their ability to feed their kids would also increase. All right? Does that make sense? So you've got multiplying, but you've also got increase. If you have multiplication, a lot of kids, but you don't have increase, it means hunger. If you had a lot of increase and you have no kids, it means you have a lot of food, but you don't have any kids. Both different sides of the same equation. You're only blessed if you have both. All right? Okay, so, like I said, without modern technology, you are in big trouble if anything went wrong. Now, the Israelites were commanded to walk with God. All right? And part of walking with God was the very unique land grant covenant, and we talked about that last week. And see, these blessings, they're all tied in one way or another to the land, to being in God's promised land. That was the context of the blessings and curses. As we'll see in the curses later, the biggest curse was removal from the land, and of course, that's us today. Unless you're watching from Israel, and if you are, shalom. But for, most everybody, the biggest curse was being separated from the land and not having your land inheritance. And that applies to everyone today because the land inheritances have been wiped out through centuries and really through 2,500 years of either absolute exile or having foreign invaders own the land. Not just the Babylonians, but the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Muslims. They had that land for a long time, and the ancient inheritances that they got in the times of Joshua have long been forgotten. No one has any idea who owns what pieces of land, but we talked about that last week. In Ezekiel 47, it talks about what Messiah is going to do about that. And that was really exciting. I hope you caught that. So, part of walking with God was about having the land inheritance and being able to remain in the land. Now, Israel is absolutely unique in all the world. That's not like God didn't create the whole world. Of course, He created the whole world. You can't just create one part of the world, not the rest, right? It doesn't work that way. So, Israel is capable, this says this over and over in Scripture, Israel is capable of vomiting out its inhabitants. The land would stop producing if the inhabitants got too disgusting. Part of God's covenant with Israel is He had a covenant with the land. And the land was entitled to its Sabbaths. We talked about that last week too. Every 7th year, the land was to be left fallow. You don't work the land, you let it rest. And in the 6th year, it would produce quite a few years' worth so that you would have no lack, that everyone could eat. All right, but the land got its Sabbaths, except the land never did get its Sabbaths. Remember, we talked about that for 490 years. So, now, Israel is always in harmony with God. The land of Israel is in harmony with God. To produce absolutely everything His people needed according to 7-year cycles. I don't know if you've seen pictures about what the land was like before 1948 and the Jews came back into the land. It was a wasteland. But then the Jews come back and, well, what do you know? It starts blooming and blossoming again. Because those people who came back were Jews. They were from the 12 tribes. They were the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom the land was promised. All right? So, it started blooming when they came back. Go figure, maybe this stuff with the land having, being unique has something to it, because the land certainly does seem to like having the Jews back. All right. And so the land would produce everything they needed as long as they walked in order, which is walking in harmony with God, as opposed to chaos, which is walking in rebellion with God. And in the curses, we see that You know, first one says, I will bless you. If you're following me and you're doing what I say, I will bless you in this, I will bless you in this, I will bless you in this. All having to do with the land and prosperity and being able to support themselves from the land. And then it talks about the curse. It says, but if you walk contrary to me, meaning if we're rebelling against him, if we're really not interested in doing things his way, well, it's just like in any house. When everyone in the house is living by different rules, it's chaotic. Can you imagine every single person in a house living according to different standards and different rules? No, how about nobody was listening to dad and mom, and there were a lot of kids? Yikes. All right, so God's kingdom is like a home. Oh, curses. You know, a lot of people think curses, they think magic witch's spell. Woo. No. When you hear the word curses, I want you to think of discipline. All right? The curses were like being grounded. First you get grounded a little bit, then you get grounded more, and you get grounded more and more and more, and then all of a sudden they boot you out of the house. Same thing with God's land and God's people. They're called the children of Israel because they were his adopted children. When he told Pharaoh, this is my son, let him go, well, that was a formal adoption declaration in the ancient world. All right? But that's in the book, and that's more complicated than I want to get into here. All right. So think curses, think discipline. And why do your parents discipline you? Is it because they're mean and cruel and sadistic? No, it's because they're hoping you'll respond to the light amount of discipline. And if that doesn't work, they ramp it up. And if that doesn't work, they ramp it up. And then all of a sudden, you know, yeah, it gets really, really bad. All of a sudden you're sleeping with a, you know, with a sheet on the hard concrete floor in the garage, and you're eating, you know, Brussels sprouts and drinking water straight from the well, and first world problems here right now. All right, anyway, so imagine living in a home where everyone lives by the same good rules and treats their home and their land, and I didn't add parents, but parents respectfully, okay? That would be a great place to live. Everyone would be in harmony. Mom and dad would be happy, the kids would be happy, the land would be happy, the home would be happy, and your neighbors would be happy if you have people living close by that have to listen to a house where people are yelling at each other all the time because everybody's living in chaos. Okay, now imagine living in a home where everyone lives by their own rules and treats the house and land disrespectfully. No harmony, yelling and screaming all the time. That'd be awful. And you know, when you got something like that, you know, everything suffers. Everything suffers. Okay. And if you didn't treat the land respectfully, it's going to start looking bad. You know, if you're piling garbage up in the front yard and you're letting trash blow in, and the vegetable garden, you don't weed it and everything, that's disrespectful. And everything's going to start to suffer. And God commanded them not to treat his land like that and not to treat his laws like that. All right, so the respectful house is full of blessings because there's harmony. Okay, it doesn't mean everything always goes right, especially out here. And we're not in the land, we're in exile, so it's a bummer. Okay, the disrespectful house is full of curses. As a matter of fact, oftentimes the disrespectful house is full of cursing, if you know what I mean. So, in the ancient world, so here we're going to get to the difference between God's ways and the ways of the heathen nations. In the ancient world, if a family was experiencing terrible trials, they'd start sacrificing to all the gods. There is this prayer to a god named Marduk. He's the chief god of the Babylonians. Or he was. You don't care about this. Okay, just stop me if I get boring, okay? Just reach through and bring me to my senses. All right, so this guy was praying to Marduk, and he had this prayer, and it was like, I don't even know what I've done wrong. You don't tell me what you want. I think you'd like this, and then I do this, and then terrible things would happen to me. And then I do this other thing that would seem like it would be displeasing to you, and everything starts going right. How are we supposed to please a God? The gods of the ancient world, they didn't tell anyone how to please them. Makes them very different from our God, who told everyone exactly how to please him. All right, so something would go wrong in the ancient world, and they called it chaos. Their lives would go into chaos. Chaos is what happens when gods are unhappy and gods are making trouble. And so they would go on what I call the sacrificial world tour, where they'd start sacrificing to every god they could think of. You know, they got all the little temples. Oh, let me make a gift, and would you please, you know, sacrifice to such and such for me, and you know, tell them I'm sorry if I did anything to offend them. I don't know what it is, but you know, there's something. There's something. Job is a good book that talks about this. Job's buddies were not followers of our God. Job was, and they're all going, "You did something wrong. These gods, you know, they don't punish people lightly, and you did something. You just got to start repenting for everything." So now in ancient Israel, when things started going wrong, on the other hand, the prophets were quick to remind the people exactly which god they'd offended and why. You know, the laws were there. Are you worshiping idols? Maybe that's the problem. Are you know, did you steal from your neighbor? And now all of a sudden everything's going wrong? Has it occurred to you that maybe God meant it when he said, "You shall not steal"? Just a thought. Cheating on your wife? Is that why you have a black eye? Okay. You know, gotta suggest that maybe these commandments here were meant to be taken seriously. So, and the prophets actually probably didn't say it like that. It's a little without the sarcasm. Anyway, the whole thing with chapter 26 of Leviticus is, to sum it up, the laws of God showed the people of the ancient world how to escape chaos and find order. And it was paramount on everyone's mind. They didn't want chaotic lives. They didn't want famine. They didn't want the curses and the discipline. They didn't want their wives to be barren. They didn't want their wives to miscarry. They didn't want all of the terrible things that we live with now. And they didn't want diseases. And of course, I told you, the biggest blessing was that they could remain in the land forever. The biggest curse is that they would be exiled from the land for a while. And out here, we're in exile. And so we do experience these things. And as long as we're in exile, we're under a curse. Now all we can do is try to live by God's laws and do better and better and better and learn, so that when Messiah comes, we'll be ready to go into the land and live according to his ways. And then we will know the blessings. Then we won't be living with the curses as long as we're listening to him. So, that's it for this week. Oh, by the way, why did I wear the Chewbacca shirt today? Because of Chewbacca Mom! She rocks! And I can't tell you how many people, I probably could if I counted them, how many people sent me Chewbacca Mom. I don't know why people thought that this would somehow be interesting to me, and how somehow that would be really how I remind them of her some way. Or she reminds them of me, but anyway, yeah, Chewbacca Mom. If you haven't seen the video, check it out. I've got a really cool article and a really cool other video on my blog this week, and I hope you check it out, about unicorns in the Bible. And I do have my blog up now. It's www.contextforkids.com. You can get updates in your email box every Monday if you want to check that out. And I'm going to try and have cool other stuff every week, educational things, just things that are fun to study together as a family. And I finished writing my book on Friday. Yes. So now I've got it, the editor. And then Sarah, and shout out to Sarah's kids. That's Sarah Hawks Valente, who does Lessons in Yeshua's Torah, who I always tell you about. And she's working on a new version of that, and she'll have that out before the next Torah cycle for you guys with little kids. And then David Farley, shout out to the Farley kids who also watch. And he does my layout and my book cover. So that'll be out soon, hopefully by June, late June sometime. Very excited. So next week we start Numbers, and Numbers, they do some really messed up things, so of course when they do messed up stuff, we can have fun talking about it. Anyway, so I love you, and I'm praying for you, and I pray that you have a great week studying the scriptures together. Have a wonderful week. Bye.